A very good morning to you. For the first time in nearly 3 months, lockdown restrictions in England are being eased today with the end of stay-at-home guidance and a return of the rule of 6 outdoors. Now, it comes with a warning from the government, though, to stick to the rules and not be tempted to mix inside. Well, from this morning, 6 people or 2 households, even if the number of people is higher, can meet in a park or public place or private garden as well. Now, outdoor organised sport can resume as well, and it is officially the end of the stay-at-home rule, although the government says people should still work from home where possible. Sadia Chowdhury reports.
For months in England, we were told to stay at home. From today, that's a thing of the past. And no sooner had the rules been relaxed, they were teeing off in Derbyshire. Just the sort of dedication needed to keep the nation fit and healthy.
I've been off work for the last 4 out of 5 months, so it's nice just to get out of the house and see people and, back to a bit of normality. So.
Definitely the social side, it's what it's all about, really. And the fact that you get to play golf, it's a bonus.
Fresh air dilutes the virus particles and can blow them away.
COVID recovery is central to this message, and as restrictions ease, an important reminder.
Stay outside when you're with people not in your household or bubble.
Nowhere better, perhaps, than a tennis court.
Every court is booked from 7 o'clock until 8:30 in the evening.
The biggest difficulty is when conversations off-court get strung out.
We manage them on the courts, and then as soon as they leave, whoosh, they rush together.
In some parts of the country, tennis court bookings are up by a reported 500%. And with lockdown easing, that trend is set to continue. And not just in tennis. Our green spaces have seen an unprecedented number of visitors, not without consequences.
We are having areas of grass that are being a little bit damaged by the footfall, so we ask people to try and stick to paths wherever they can. We ask people even to maybe stagger their visits to the park to different times of day.
Today's hot weather comes with a plea from the Metropolitan Police to not get complacent and a promise that they will hand out fines. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
Well, the backdrop to England's looser lockdown is another set of figures which suggests the pandemic is still slowly subsiding in the UK. The latest figures show 3,862 new cases have been reported, with 19 more deaths recorded. That takes the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 126,592. The figures also confirm another vaccine record, with more than 30 million first doses now given. Well, let's talk to our reporter Ashna Huranag, who's at one outdoor swimming pool in London that has reopened, literally just reopened this morning. Ashna, I see the people in the pool already.
They really are. You've got some real eager beavers this morning, Stephen. Today does absolutely feel like the stepping down off another rung of the lockdown ladder. If I move out the way, you can take a look at some of those who are taking full advantage of that today. With the weather turning today and restrictions being eased, today at the Tooting Lido, it's expected to be quite busy. We've got 60 people per session. Every session is booked out today. That means about 360 people are going to come down, eager to get in that water, which I have to say is a balmy 9.6 degrees. It's the largest freshwater pool in England, and this, of course, is one of many outdoor sports which are resuming today. It's not just swimmers, but climbers, golfers, tennis players alike, for that long-awaited taste of freedom. That stay-at-home order does, of course, lift as well today. It's likely we're going to see day trippers and tourists resuming, not only coming down to places like this, but also local landmarks, perhaps the park, for instance. You can now meet up to 6 people in a group of 6, or 2 households can mix together in someone's garden. It's likely, though, that with the enthusiasm of today, there will, of course, be some element of caution too. As the Prime Minister has always said, the success of today has come down to the vaccination rollout, but the caution will come because we know what can happen when restrictions are eased, and it's hoped there won't be consequences to follow.
Sport and tourism. Good to see you this morning, Minister. Look, let's talk about sport first and foremost. A lot of people wanting to get back to sport. Exercise is a key thing, of course. But how difficult is it to make sure that this is all carried out in a COVID-safe way?
Well, of course, today's a really big day for millions of people across the UK just dying to get back to the things that they love. And we've seen that already in your piece just there. I mean, the minute that the locations are opening, people are there. But they're taking the responsibilities, those opening up the spaces, really seriously with COVID secure measures and then the grassroots sport as well. It's all within guidelines. So those who are running these events know what they need to do, and they're doing so very responsibly. So I'm very confident things will open safely.
But on the wider issue and just meeting people in the rule of six or the two families situation in a public place or a private garden, how difficult is that going to be to police? Because we know when restrictions were eased at the end of last summer, we saw lots of people gathering, and perhaps not surprisingly so. How do you expect people to stick to the rules this time?
Well, first of all, I think we can trust in the common sense of the British public to a very great degree. The vast majority of people absolutely stick to the rules, and actually there's a fair bit of self-policing that goes on as well. But indeed, if there are breaches, then the police can intervene and fine, and they'll continue to do so where that's the case. But the message very clearly, and hence the new message today actually, is making sure that it's very much about outdoors and open space. So these are baby steps, they're significant steps, but they're cautious baby steps in part of the reopening plans. And I say the message is it's outdoors, it's not indoors yet, so please be sensible.
But the stay-at-home guidance has gone, so where does that leave people in terms of saying, I mean, my parents live in the Lake District, could I travel to the Lake District to visit them outside in their garden and then come home again? Is that allowed?
It is allowed, but you're absolutely right. It needs to be outside in the garden. And I think if people are travelling, they need to think very carefully about how they travel, where they fill up for petrol, if they need food and so on. Probably get that locally before you go on the journey, because what we don't want is people intermixing in different parts of the country to any greater degree than necessary. And then when you do go and visit a friend or a relative, make sure you stay in those gardens or stay outdoors and obey those rules. So please just, again, be sensible.
Yeah, but that does involve common sense. And, of course, the great British public, a lot of us have common sense. But when it comes to policing the rules, that makes it very difficult for the police, doesn't it, when people are using their own common sense, their own initiative? You know, how do police police it?
Well, it is a combination, isn't it? Because, I mean, of course, the police are there to implement the law, and there are still laws here, and they will implement fines. So if there's large gatherings, again, remember, it's a rule of six, and up to six, but only six or two households. So if the police see people breaking those rules, they can intervene, they can break up, and as I say, if necessary, fine. I recognise it's more difficult in people's private gardens, and that's why we're appealing to people to be sensible for the sake of their health and others. Please don't break the rules. They're there for a reason. They're there for the public safety and public health. And I say the vast majority of people do comply, and we really appreciate that.
As we move forward, though, I mean, this is the first step, and you said baby steps. We get that, but of course it gives us all a little bit of hope, me included, I've got to say, that come August we may get the chance of a little bit of a summer holiday. Is that still a possibility, or is government ruling that out at this stage, the fact we might be able to hop on a plane and head to the continent?
Well, I think there's two things there. First, remember, you can have a holiday in the UK as well, and I encourage people to do that and plan for that as well. But indeed, overseas travel, the Global Travel Task Force is reporting very soon, actually, and that will help determine the parameters for international travel. But you're right, it's important not only for people getting on a plane and going overseas, but I'm also the Minister for Tourism. We want people to come into the UK as well. Inbound tourism is hugely important to our economy. So on a global basis, we're working with our other countries to make sure that we can open up international travel, but we'll do so cautiously.
I mean, we have to bear in mind there's all this talk of the third wave across mainland Europe, but some experts saying, of course, the third wave is actually the UK variant. So we have to tie all that in, don't we, into how we make those decisions about August and further onwards?
Well, absolutely, and caution is the name of the game here. I mean, we are seeing rises in Europe. There are actually, quite a few variants around the world, and we do have to keep a very close eye on the variants. In fact, that's one of the Prime Minister's stated tests. We'll keep a close eye on variants. But as I said, we do want to open up as soon as we can. That goes for domestic and indeed international, but we'll do so cautiously based on the evidence, and we'll keep a very close eye on what's happening in both the EU and elsewhere around the world.
Look, from talking about the positives that we've seen, or are seeing from today onwards, let's keep our fingers crossed it all follows the plan. Can we look at what COVID has done over the past year? Because your colleague, former Home Secretary, former Chancellor Sajid Javid is publishing a report today. He's led in this report about sexual abuse, child sexual abuse in England, particularly during the pandemic, and seeing how that has escalated. He's talking about a number of loopholes that needs to be closed now. I mean, I know there's a lot of issues which have been brought to the fore because of the pandemic, but this one in particular is one that has to be addressed, and addressed urgently, isn't it?
Well, I agree completely. And my neighbouring MP, Sajid, we've got a lot of time for him. We'll listen very carefully about what he and the report has to say. It's absolutely that we take steps, and if there are loopholes, then we'll take action. The Home Office and others will be keeping a very close eye on this development. Unfortunately, COVID has not impacted directly people's physical health. It's also opened up quite a range of problems, mental health, and indeed, unfortunately, cases of abuse are more prevalent. So further action will be taken there.
But alongside his report, we're getting all these very concerning reports about what is happening in some schools, and pupils and former pupils who are coming forward to allege incidents. Now, they're being investigated, we know, but that raises some very real questions, doesn't it, about how these issues are addressed in our schools?
It does, and immediately you'll be aware that there is now a helpline to anybody who's facing these kind of abuses. So please do call that helpline. But we will be looking at this, and of course the Ofsted and the Inspectorate do have powers up to and including closing down schools if there's evidence there. So we will again be looking very closely at this. It's a quite alarming picture that's been emerging over the last few days.
Just an interesting one to throw at you to finish, Minister. There's a report, it's in the Telegraph this morning, but reports saying, and we've heard it anecdotally, about the term BAME, Black and Asian Minority Ethnic. We use it when we're talking about some minority groups in the UK. It's become something we see each and every day. Now, I appreciate, as it would be for me, it's difficult for you to answer it in some respects because we don't fall into those groups. But does this need to be looked at? Because the reports are saying, that actually there are a lot of people who fall under the BAME category who just don't like it as terminology. They don't think it works. They don't think it represents them. Do we need to look again?
Well, I haven't seen the full report of the Commission, but I think you're right. We've got to be sensitive to treat people as individuals, and sometimes categorisations can be challenging or indeed offensive, even if they're not intended to be so. But as I said, I haven't seen the full report yet. We'll see what it has to say and then act accordingly. OK, Minister, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you. As well. Thank you.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Kate McCann, who's here. Morning to you. I mean, look, there seems to be, what the Minister was saying about the guidelines and the rules being eased from today, that it's a lot about common sense, but that still raises questions about how we apply the rules and how we police the rules.
It does, and I think what we're going to be hearing a lot this week from ministers is that note of caution. You heard it there, baby steps, do everything, little and, each step little and often, I suppose, if you like. You're allowed to go and see people in your garden, you're allowed to have two households mixing, but what the government doesn't want to happen is people going inside each other's homes, is people hugging, is us all feeling like, freedom. Of course, we're going to see this coincide with a heat wave this week. That's going to be slightly difficult too. What they want people to do is use their judgment. So one of the interesting answers there in that interview was that you are allowed to go and travel to see your parents in the Lake District, but you shouldn't stop on the way. You should prepare food before you go, and of course, you'd only be able to do that outside. But as you say, that does lead to some pretty big questions about people travelling around the country to beauty spots, for example, and maybe going for a longer day out than they have been allowed to before. and again, some questions on policing. So I think the government message is going to be about caution, it's going to be about outside, it's going to be about underlining the fact that, yes, we can do more, but we still can't do everything. And they hope that people will follow those rules, because remember, that plan relies on us all doing that and nothing changing in between now and the next stage of unlocking.
OK, Kate, thank you. Now, reports this morning say engineers have managed to partially refloat a giant container ship stranded in the Suez Canal. The Ever Given and its cargo have been blocking the canal for 6 days now. Salvage engineers say there's still a long way to go, but the former chairman of the Suez Canal Authority has told Sky News he's confident it could happen soon. The ship got stuck last Tuesday. Initially, diggers were used to try to evacuate the bow of the ship. On Wednesday, Egyptian authorities used tugs to try to tow the ship to freedom. 2 days later, specialist salvage and dredging equipment was employed to try to refloat the vessel. And on Saturday, tugs managed to move the ship 30 degrees after tons of sand were dredged. More tugs have now arrived, and salvagers hope to take advantage of a full moon and the resulting spring tide. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Alistair Bunkall, who's in Egypt for us this morning. Look, I mean, the implications of this in terms of the trade down the Suez Canal are absolutely huge, Alistair. I mean, how hopeful are they that this may be the day when things start to get moving again?
Look, I think this is really good news. And if you look at some of the images that have started to come out overnight from the location on the Suez Canal, it does look as though there's quite a sizable gap that's now opened up along the canal, because we're all now very familiar with that, particularly that top-down image that shows the Ever Given diagonally across the waterway, blocking it completely. What they've managed to do in the early hours of the morning using 10 tugs is pull it in 4 different directions and ease it out enough that it is starting to point in the right direction now. Now, having said that, one of the senior people from the Dutch rescue operation who are helping the Egyptians was on Dutch radio this morning saying it's still not a piece of cake from here on in. Those were his words. They're bringing down another tug later today that they hope will be able to pull it completely free, but there is still the possibility that they'll need to offload some of those shipping containers on board the Ever Given in order to make it lighter. If that is the route they have to go down, then that's what could be quite lengthy. That could delay it further still. Having said that, given where we were late last night and given where we were this morning, the ship is now certainly partially refloated. According to some reports, it's 80% refloated, and it is looking far more positive this morning for the Suez Canal being opened up very soon.
But what has the impact been, Alistair, on the Suez Canal being closed? I mean, it's one of the world's busiest waterways. Being closed for best part of a week, I mean, it must have had a huge impact.
Huge impact. I mean, without any doubt, there will be items of furniture, clothing, kids' toys in your home up and down the country that will have passed through the Suez Canal, making its way from the Far East into Western Europe. It is a hugely busy shipping lane that obviously most of us aren't always aware that what we're buying in shops in the UK or elsewhere has come through that shipping lane. And so to close it really has spotlighted just how damaging it can be to the global economy. It's been a week now. There are around 300, I think last count about 369 cargo ships, tankers as well, because oil and gas comes through there from the Persian Gulf. They are now stacked up, waiting to transit through. If they have to remove shipping containers, and if it takes much, much longer, then the global impact will really start to be felt.
OK, Alistair, for now, thank you. Well, still to come for you this morning, the taxi-sharing company Uber will allow some UK customers to request a zero-emissions car. We'll talk to them at 7:45 this morning. Labour says a backlog in the court system means convictions for some serious offences have fallen to a 10-year low. We'll talk to the Shadow Justice Secretary, David Lammy, just after 8 o'clock. And with so little to enjoy during the lockdown, are you one of the people who's getting an Easter wreath this year? We'll talk to a florist who says business is booming. That's at 8:20. Now, one person has been injured after more airstrikes overnight in Myanmar. Pictures taken yesterday confirm reports that about 3,000 people have now left the country, heading for neighbouring Thailand. The Foreign Office has told all British nationals in Myanmar to leave. Also making the news for you this morning, and the UK is facing an epidemic of child sex abuse, according to a report co-authored by former Home Secretary Sajid Javid. It makes nearly 100 recommendations for tackling abuse, warning that even before lockdown, governments and tech companies were losing the war and that the pandemic has created a perfect storm for victims and abusers. Officials in Mozambique say terrorists were responsible for an attack in which dozens of people, including expatriate workers, were killed. They're believed to have died during a siege at a hotel in the town of Palma. The area is reported to have been under attack by Islamist militants since Wednesday.
The Defence and Security Forces have regretfully recorded the loss of life of a group of citizens who rushed into a column of vehicles leaving from the Amarula Hotel and were ambushed by terrorists. We regret this loss of life and inform you that we are continuing our work to eliminate the terrorists.
A group of parents whose children attend Batley Grammar School have called for calm after protests against a teacher who showed a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. The school has apologised and the teacher involved has been suspended. The parents claim staff failed to appreciate how offensive the image was.
We believe that in a democratic society, everyone holds a right to opinion and expression. However, we as parents and citizens also believe that with these rights come responsibility. We as parents and citizens stand resolute that our children should be able to attend school without having their faith, which is protected in law, or their culture ridiculed, insulted or vilified.
A judge has raised concerns over government plans to hold parole board hearings in public, saying they should be approached cautiously. Hearings currently take place in private, but Rob McKeon said the effect open hearings could have on victims must be considered. Thousands of people have flocked to India's holy city of Mathura to celebrate the Hindu Festival of Colours. Restrictions around people gathering for the festival were introduced after the country reported over 62,000 new cases of coronavirus, the biggest jump since October. Now, the eyes of the world turn to the US city of Minneapolis today as a former police officer goes on trial accused of murdering George Floyd. Video of Derek Chauvin kneeling on the 46-year-old's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds last year led to global protests. And as Sally Lockwood now reports, the trial is being hailed as one of the most important in American history.
George Floyd's name has reverberated around the world. But at the centre of this story is a family in church with supporters ahead of the trial.
We're going to get this justice. One way or another, we're going to get this justice.
Their relative, but a case for justice shared by millions who feel the Floyd family is standing for them.
We're thankful to all the protesters, all the activists, everybody in America, everybody around the world who said, until we get justice for George Floyd, none of us can breathe. Prayerfully, at the end of this trial, we can all exhale together for George Floyd. Give him the breath that was denied to him by Derek Chauvin.
A backdrop of heavy security sets the stage for the trial at the courthouse in Minneapolis. A small group of activists making their voices heard. Peaceful and undeterred.
We want to walk away from this feeling like we won. We want our work to pay off, and we want a guilty verdict for all 4 officers. That is what we want. That is why we're out here.
The jury's job now begins, hearing opening statements.
The prosecution will make its case first, and it's expected will argue Derek Chauvin's actions in keeping his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes were a direct cause of his death. The defence will seek to cast doubt on those claims and introduce evidence to suggest he could have died from other factors.
and that Derek Chauvin didn't intend to harm him. For many, this trial will be a defining moment for race relations in America. The outcome uncertain and the stakes high. Sally Lockwood, Sky News, Minneapolis.
Well, Sky News will have full coverage of the trial with continuous coverage of the court proceedings, streaming live on our website and app, YouTube, and a special pop-up channel which you can find on Sky 524. That's George Floyd killing, the trial, full coverage on Sky News throughout the day. Now, let's see what the weather's going to do for you today. Naz is standing by. The big question I've got, Naz, is do I need to get the shorts and the trunks and the flip-flops out today?
You can do if you want to, Stephen. In fact, over the next few days, it's going to get increasingly sunny and warm, and temperatures generally will be above average for most places, but there will be wet and cold conditions across the far northwest.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Very good morning to you. So we're going to see lots of sunshine developing over the next few days, and it is going to become warmer, and temperatures will then become higher as well, above average for many areas over the next few days too. In fact, it's a mild start this morning across parts of the north in particular, but it's windy there. There are spells of rain across the northwest of the UK and Ireland too, heaviest over the northwest of Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, it's a cloudy but largely dry start. It's already beginning to brighten up across some southern areas, although the south coast probably staying quite cloudy for much of the day and therefore cool, and you can see that's evident with the temperatures too. But elsewhere across central and southern areas, by around midday, I think we'll see sunshine developing, and then across the rest of England and Wales through this afternoon. But the north and northwest of these areas, I think, will still hold on to quite a bit of cloud. Fairly cloudy for Ireland and Northern Ireland later too, but a bit of brightness and drier. And the south and east of Scotland also seeing a bit of brightness and warmth, but the northwest of Scotland cloudy and wet.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Well, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we'll talk to medical experts, police and the manager of an outdoor swimming pool as the lockdown in England starts to ease.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Her arms, look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Once it takes a hold, it's very, very difficult for these firefighters to get a grip of it and get on top of it and put it out.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
So, the government says people are now allowed to travel around the country to see their relatives following the easing of lockdown rules in England. After nearly 3 months, the stay-at-home guidance has changed to minimise travel. But in the last hour, the Sport and Tourism Minister, Nigel Huddleston, told me that people can travel to see family, but they must take precautions and be aware of stopping en route.
It needs to be outside in the garden. And I think if people are travelling, they need to think very carefully about how they travel, where they fill up for petrol, if they need food and so on. Probably get that locally before you go on the journey, because what we don't want is people intermixing in different parts of the country to any greater degree than necessary. And then when you do go and visit a friend or a relative, make sure you stay in those gardens or stay outdoors and obey those rules.
So, a bit more freedom for people in England, but is it the right move at the right time? Well, let's talk to former World Health Organization Director, Professor Anthony Costello, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. What do you think of the timing?
Well, the government have laid out a roadmap, and obviously we need to get out of lockdown, the incredible damage that that does economically. I mean, there is some good news around. Well over half of all our adults have had a first dose of vaccine, and the uptake rates have been much higher than people expected. These vaccines are very effective. Deaths and hospital admissions have fallen and come right down. But there is still quite a lot of caution around. As Chris Whitty said, I think last week, that further surges are inevitable, and all the models predict surges later in the year. And you may think, why is that? Because you would think as vaccination becomes more complete, we would be getting out of this. But I think the concerns relate to the numbers of people who will remain unvaccinated, particularly amongst younger age groups. Secondly, the worries about variants of the virus. You know, we've had the UK variant, which increased death rates and increased transmission, and that's the virus that's sweeping through Europe right now. We have a South Africa variant, which may have some resistance to the vaccine. And then the final worry is, if we get new outbreaks, will our test, trace and isolate system be fit for purpose?
So in terms of that surge then, if we are seeing a surge in young people, and I know there have been cases of young people who've suffered terribly with COVID and some sadly who have died, but the majority seem to fare a lot better than the older or medically vulnerable population. So can we handle a surge if it happens?
Well, a surge is to ally as high a coverage of vaccine as you can get with the public health measures that will jump on any surge as quickly as possible. And we are heading up with very good vaccination figures. We still have to see whether the under 50s are going to take it up as much as we would like. And then, of course, the issue will be later whether or not we also move to vaccinate children or not, depending upon perceptions of whether it is entirely safe or not. But the worry is that in the past, we haven't had a system that's really locked down small outbreaks. And so the small outbreaks have turned into surges, if you like. I'm a bit more optimistic than some of the modelers, because I think this summer we will find that the seasonal effects kick in. People spend more time outdoors, and hopefully we'll get down to such a low level that when new outbreaks potentially occur later in the autumn or early winter, we can jump on it very quickly. But for that, we must have a better test, trace and isolate system, which at the moment, to be honest, is not really working.
Yeah, but the key to this then would seem to be, I mean, there might be issues with with test and trace. There might be some medical issues, but it seems to be, from what you're saying, with a sense of optimism, that actually this is about us. We need to behave ourselves as lockdown is eased. We need to follow the rules. We need to be sensible. And if we do that, we're going to really mitigate the possibility of this getting considerably worse.
Yes, that's true up to a point. I mean, I think the public have behaved magnificently. I mean, everyone thought that this second major lockdown would people would transgress, and they haven't by and large. And you're right, but I think also, I mean, every country that has locked this down has had an army of people on the ground. I mean, if you're fighting a war, you need an army. And we don't have that. I was speaking to a public health director just recently. You should really have one contact tracer for every 1,500 population, which means in a district you would expect to have 100 to 150. He had 19, and none of it was funded through the 37 billion for test and trace. So I think we need to transfer the funding that we've got from call centres and the like into local public health teams so that they can really lock down any outbreaks as they occur.
OK, Professor Costello, very good to get your thoughts this morning. Thank you. So that's the sort of medical view, if you like. But of course, today is a day when things are getting a little bit easier and a lot of outdoor sports venues are reopening. And open-air swimming is one thing which is allowed. Mike Wellington is a manager at the Hathersage swimming pool in the Peak District. Good to see you this morning. I mean, how busy are you expecting things to get?
Very busy, yeah. We started ticket sales last week and we're already sold out for the first week, so we're expected to be very busy, yeah.
Well, in terms of selling out then, how does this work? I mean, what sort of limits are you having to put on the numbers you can allow into the pool?
We're working within government and Swim England guidelines, so basically our capacities are pretty much half for all of our main sessions.
In terms of the financial side of this, then, which the nitty-gritty, you've clearly been closed for a long time. What is happening? Are you having to up the prices to try and recoup a bit of money?
We haven't upped the prices, no. We understand that it has been quite a difficult time during this period. So we are run by a parish council, and the parish council have actually honoured the prices that we set out in 2019 before all the pandemic hit.
So the fact you've got the next week booked in is great news. Do you think, in terms of people following guidelines when they're in the water, how difficult is that going to be for you guys to police?
It is very difficult for us to police. Obviously, we've got signage up and everything like that to allow people to tell people they have to try to socially distance, whether they're on their own or whether they're within their family group. It can be very difficult, but we try our best to try to keep people as separate as we can.
I mean, from your regular swimmers, what have they told you about the impact that it's had on them not being able to get out and do their normal exercise in the pool?
We've had a lot of communications with our local people, especially our regular swimmers. It's been very hard on them, really. We are a very community-based facility. It has been very difficult for them. We class ourselves a bit of a family here, so to not have our regular people coming and using our facility has been very upsetting for us and for them.
But a bit of a sense of light at the end of the tunnel now?
Fingers crossed, yes. Hopefully things will start going back. If the roadmap starts working, then hopefully we'll be back to normal relatively soon.
Well, yeah, fingers crossed. Mike, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have to say, I do fancy a bit of a dip after all this talk about Lidos and getting in a pool and what have you. Still to come for you this morning, the taxi-sharing company Uber will allow some UK customers to request a zero-emissions car. We'll talk to them in a few minutes.
We're going to open with A Midsummer Night's Dream, that incredible story of magic. Just listening to your last article, it definitely feels like we're being very overwhelmed by the world at the moment, and we need things to take us away from it and transcend it. So yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream. Then we'll go into Romeo and Juliet, a pandemic play. As we know, Shakespeare was the plague writer. He knew better than anyone what it was like to write in these conditions and find ways out of these conditions. And that's as much about laughter in Midsummer Night's Dream as it is about loss and grief and injustice, as we've just been hearing about in these plays, and then into Twelfth Night. And our touring company will come back. Whether they'll get beyond Bankside this year, it remains to be seen, but they'll be working with the local community and a brand new play based on Ovid's Metamorphoses, so very consciously talking about how we transform ourselves physically, literally, metaphorically out of this time. First and foremost, how are we getting audiences and artists back into the theatre safely? We'll obviously have single flow traffic, we'll stagger start times. But again, just to go back to Shakespeare, I think where we're lucky is this is a writer that knew how to write plays during the plague. And he also knew how to take care of audiences during the plague. And one of those ways is, as he says in Romeo and Juliet, let's keep these plays down to 2 hours traffic. When he says 2 hours traffic, he means just the movement of the plays, keep those plays going, keep people entertained, and also no intervals. And I think that's something that surprised people, that it's the plays when intervals is obviously quite a recent invention, a very unapologetically commercial invention. And we all know that Shakespeare would definitely have approved of the bar and definitely approved of the gift shop. But as we try and think about reducing ways of how are we reducing congregation and making sure that we can keep people safe? So again, going back to the heart of what those plays were about is autonomy for the audience. So you are free to come and go as you please. He will make sure that he repeats any important plot points. So if you need to leave to go to the toilet, you go, or to go to the bar, you go, or to go and buy your stamp or your rubber or your badge, you go, and then you come back and the play will just keep going.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Safety Radio on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know that reducing pollution outside of school can help stop toxic air getting trapped in our classrooms?
Sunshine and warmth will develop quite widely over the majority of England and Wales today. However, elsewhere will be cloudier with some patchy rain over the north of England and Wales and heavy rain across northwest Scotland. But eastern Scotland looks to be mainly dry, bright and warm, and it'll be bright at times and fairly warm for Ireland and Northern Ireland too. So taking a look at the air pollution levels on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very high, most places are expected to remain predominantly low on Monday. However, some isolated pockets of moderate levels of 4 to 6 may persist across the Northern Isles.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, from today, one of the biggest online taxi firms will offer passengers in London the option to always take a zero-emissions vehicle, the electric car. Uber say customers in the capital can use that at no extra cost. Well, let's talk to Uber Regional Manager Jamie Hayward, who joins us. Good to see you this morning. Why have you decided to put this on the table?
Good morning. So we're delighted to announce that, as restrictions ease and cities start to open, the Uber Green will be available in London, allowing riders to select a fully electric vehicle for the first time. And as you say, as the trips will be priced the same as UberX, and as drivers will also pay a lower service fee, we're hoping that will encourage more and more drivers to switch to an EV.
So how many electric vehicles have you got amongst your drivers there? Because are you going to find yourself overwhelmed with demand pretty quickly?
We think there is going to be some very, very good demand. At the moment, we have 1,600 EVs in central London. And that's up from around 100 when we launched the Clean Air Plan, which is something we put in place in January 2019 to help drivers save for an EV. So that plan has now helped drivers save £125 million in individual driving savings accounts, which means that the average driver who has a savings account can save up to £4,500 on a vehicle.
Right. I'm wondering if this is, a sort of company initiative that you're trying to push for green credentials, or is this customer demand driven, or a bit of both?
It's absolutely customer demand driven. I mean, it's important to say that today's announcement is the culmination of almost 3 years of work that we've been doing in Uber. I've mentioned the Clean Air Plan, which we launched in January 2019. We've also got a number of commercial relationships, such as with BP's Pulse charging network, which means that drivers can get access to charging points at lower prices. And we've also helped drivers move into more affordable EVs by negotiating discounts with companies like Nissan and Kia. So this is very much the culmination of a lot of work from a lot of people over a long time.
Just very briefly, because, great news for people in London who want to go green in that way, but most people watching are not in London. They're around the rest of the country. So when do you spread this out?
Yeah, so we are, from today, it's being launched in London, but actually it's part of an important milestone on our way to electrify our whole fleet in the UK. So we've made the commitment to be fully EV in London by 2025 and fully EV across the UK by 2030. So Uber Green will be rolling out to other cities in the coming future.
Jamie, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Now, let's talk about the role that policing is going to play in the easing of restrictions, which, of course, all come in today. I'm joined by the National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, John Apter. Good to see you, John. Are you clear in terms of what the rules are that you are now going to have to police?
Good morning, Stephen. Ish, which I know is not the most helpful of answers. But yes, we are reasonably clear. I think the frustrating thing for police officers who are out there on the front line trying to enforce this, if they need to educate the public, is that there's still an awful lot of confusion as to what people can do, and that's why I've been calling on both the Prime Minister and the leaders of the devolved governments to be absolutely crystal clear in their messaging to the public and to policing as to what's expected, because there's a difference between legislation and guidance. Guidance is not legally enforceable. People seem to think it is. But we are on the road to this easing of lockdown, which we all want. My concern is what happened last year was many people see this as, the floodgates are open and they can do whatever they want, which is simply not the case.
And yet we had clarification from the Minister earlier this hour saying, if we wanted to travel, as I would, for 300 miles up to the Lake District to visit my parents, as long as I stayed outside and didn't go in the house and followed those rules, I am free to travel the length and breadth of the country now. I mean, were you aware of that?
Yeah, well, it was guidance because what was announced, or what's been announced today, is the government have said that you should stay at home, you should limit your travel, but that's not must, that's not legislation. And obviously within Wales, it's slightly different. So if you cross the border, you need to be aware of the legislation over there because it is slightly different. But yes, you can travel. And I think many people don't realise that. Now, this isn't the police saying what you can and can't do. This is the government. This is legislation. What my colleagues have to do is interpret that legislation, which is not always easy, and engage with the public to try and make their lives as positive as they can. But it's not always been easy. And certainly easing out of lockdown, as I've said, creates its own problems.
And it's the confrontation issue as well, isn't there? I mean, there's these situations now where there's the rule of 6 outside or 2 families, which may exceed 6. I mean, that puts police officers in a very difficult position when they have to go and approach people to find out what on earth is actually going on.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, there are still members of the public who are making complaints to the police when they see large groups. And that will continue. And that's because people are still concerned. There's still a deadly virus out there that we're all trying to play our part to minimise the impact. So if police officers see large groups out and about, then they could well engage with them and ask them, if they're from 2 households. But it does get incredibly complicated. And it's also really intrusive because this is not the way that we want to police. This is what we're trying to do to keep everybody as safe as possible. But it's certainly not easy. And the vast majority of the public get that, and they support us and they work with us to try and make things as good as they can. But some people obviously will take advantage of the situation. That's what we've seen.
I mean, a lot of this, of course, is driven by the fact the vaccination programme has worked so incredibly well so far. I mean, 57% of the adult population have had their first dose now. Police officers have not been put on a sort of higher list, if you like. Does that, I mean, you may say it wasn't fair, but is anything that needs to be done now to try and get police officers vaccinated as soon as possible with this continued interaction with the public?
Absolutely, Stephen, and I'm putting pressure on government all the time to do the right thing. Look, what they're expecting police officers to do, go in and out of people's homes, to police large-scale events, to sadly deal with the deaths in people's homes, people who've died from COVID and other conditions. There's a risk there. And whilst the risk of death or serious illness for my colleagues might be reduced because of age, then they can then become super spreaders themselves, and nobody wants that. So I'm still calling on the government to do the right thing, prioritise my colleagues. We've got some large-scale events coming up in the coming months where hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers will be deployed around the country, and yet none of them are being prioritised for the vaccine. I just think it's a real betrayal by the government.
John, we've got to leave it there, but good to talk to you. Thank you. This is Sky News Breakfast. Let's get a check on the weather for you now with Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. We're now into British summertime and we've got lots of spring sunshine to come with that as well. It is going to be increasingly sunny and warm over the next few days, but across the far northwest it will be wet and cold. In fact, rain is going to persist across western Scotland and there will be the risk of flooding issues there, as the Met Office do also have a warning out for western parts of Scotland because of that rain persisting. And it is there this morning and across the northwest of Ireland too. Some patchy outbreaks across the northwest of England and Wales as well. And it's a fairly cloudy start this morning, but it's mild, particularly across the north, where it is unfortunately rather windy as well. Now, by around midday, we'll see sunshine develop across southern areas. May stay quite cloudy, though, around the south coast and quite cool there through the day. But inland, there'll be more in the way of sunshine and it will be warming up as well. And across the rest of England and Wales, there will be sunshine later as well. But the northwest, these areas, I think, will hold on to quite a bit of cloud with some patchy light rain. And there will be a fair amount of cloud across Ireland, Northern Ireland, the south and east of Scotland too. But across these areas, the cloud will break and thin at times. So there will be some brightness about, just not as sunny as it will be across the majority of England and Wales. And it will become drier across the northwest of Ireland as that rain band shifts its way further northwards up to the far northwest of Scotland, heading towards the Northern Isles as we head into tonight. So still some very wet conditions there through tonight. And that rain band continues to sink a little further southwards into the northwest of mainland Scotland by dawn. For Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, quite cloudy. The same too for Northern England. The rest of England and Wales will be clear, chilly and frosty with some mist and fog across the south. But again, lots of sunshine for England and Wales and later Ireland tomorrow.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.